And Casey, it looks like we're sort of plateauing here and I'm sure folks will keep joining us. But why don't we, in the interest of time, let me hand it over to Casey Kelly. Casey chairs our hydrogen technologies or hydrogen innovation and technologies working group, and which is a reminder for all of you who are APA members. We've established a couple of working groups recently. Jason Berwin is leading our energy storage group, and Casey Kelly from Constellation is leading our focus around hydrogen. And so, Casey, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Welcome, everybody. We're very excited for our second webinar in our Hydrogen Markets and Technology Working Group series. I'll just remind everybody that this is hopefully the first of many, and that we'll be having another one that will get announced shortly. But very excited today to have Tomas Green with us, and Jeff Clark. You know, we all know him, and he'll do a great job today moderating this. But for the sake of time, Jeff, I think I'll just turn it right over to you so we can squeeze as much out of this presentation as absolutely possible.
Well, that was quick. Thank you, Casey. And also, I just want to recognize Constellation. Thank you for hosting us in Houston yesterday for our board meeting. That was very, very kind of you, and it turned out to be a great location and venue. So thank you for that. And again, thanks to all of you who are joining us. This is a very exciting webinar for me, and I'll say, you know, that I met Tomas at the Georgia Hydrogen Think Tank, or Think Tank. I think they've called her the Brain Trust.
Yeah.
Incredibly named only because they invited me to join, so it's clearly not named correctly. But the Georgia Hydrogen Brain Trust that Senator John Ossoff and Commissioner Tim Echols have put together in Georgia. Tomas spoke to the group there about hydrogen and the Biden administration's green hydrogen plan. And it's helpful for me because as much as I was paying attention and taking notes, I need to see it a second time. And so after the meeting, I asked Tomas if he would share his insights with us. It was very informative, and the administration has aggressive plans to promote green hydrogen manufacturing, to bring manufacturing back to the United States, and in some cases, for the first time, to bring technologies back to the States, and then to also build out a hydrogen ecosystem and opportunities for offtake. And that will help, of course, this country take the lead in new technologies, but also help us meet our emissions reduction goals and other environmental goals that we have. So it's a very exciting time in hydrogen. And of course, it's very important to us, not only for our member companies who are in hydrogen, but for all of us who are looking to provide energy for hydrogen production. And so, Tomas, I just want to thank you again for taking time to join us. We are going to make the Q&A available. So if you have questions, put those in the Q&A. I'll be teeing those up to Tomas. In the interest of time, I'll be taking those questions and putting them forward at the end of his presentation. But I encourage you to ask questions. And again, thank you all for being here. And most importantly, Tomas. So we'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Well, thanks, Jeff and Casey, for the opportunity to speak again. Yes, it was a great session with the senator down in Georgia, and happy to continue to share these insights. I'm Tomas Green. I'm a technology manager in the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Technology Office at DOE. We've been one of these offices that has quietly worked on hydrogen technologies for the last 20 years. For a while, the program was really focused on light-duty vehicles, and now we're sort of focusing on everything except for light-duty vehicles. A lot of focus on the transportation sector, but also a lot of focus on chemical, industrial, and manufacturing capabilities for clean hydrogen technologies here in the United States. So excited to talk about some of the U.S. strategy that we've developed, and some of this, the opportunities for you all to continue to engage with our work at the Department of Energy. So just for level setting here, as Jeff said, this fits into an administration goal for aggressive emission reductions by 2050. The original Paris target was 26 to 28% emission reductions by 2025, which we're pretty much on track to meet. But the updated Paris target is 50 to 52% emission reductions by 2030, which the best modeling says IRA will get us pretty close, but we might need some additional support to get all the way there. And in terms of reaching net zero, that's really where hydrogen will come into play for some of these sectors where, simply adding renewables to the grid will not increase the emission reductions anymore. You'll kind of like plateau there a little bit, where hydrogen can really target some of those deep decarbonization needs that will need to get across a lot of different sectors. So these are ambitious goals, and they all really tie into this fundamental question that the administration is tackling now, which is how do we transform our energy system while ensuring it becomes more equitable and just? And we've seen a lack of support for some clean energy technologies in parts of the country. And part of it is due to people don't necessarily see themselves as part of the clean energy economy. And we want to make sure that we are developing, the local manufacturing, the local support, the pipeline of innovation and talent here in the United States, keeping it onshore through an industrial policy to make sure that we are transforming our energy system, but also lifting up the American people in the process. So a snapshot of what hydrogen looks like today. We produce 10 million metric tons in the United States each year. And on this left, you see a bar graph of what this goes to. Primarily, it goes to the refining sector, and then some to chemical production, ammonia and methanol. We use hydrogen as a feedstock. And then there's 10% of sort of a suite of very niche end uses. But we're very dependent on hydrogen because we're dependent on imported oil. Hydrogen is used to reduce sulfur content in fuels. It's also used to break up longer carbon chains into shorter carbon process called dehydrogenation. And a lot of hydrogen use is concentrated in the Gulf Coast for this reason at oil refineries. So that picture, we expect to change over time as we become less dependent on foreign fuels. And it'll also change as we have a transition in the transportation sector to be using more electrified end uses. Now, compared to 10 million metric tons of use today to 12 million metric tons of announced projects by the mid-2030s. This is this graph, this map in the middle of the chart here, that shows the distribution of projects across the United States for clean hydrogen projects, addressing a variety of end uses and sectors. Now, only about 1.5 million metric tons of these have been actually come to a final investment decision, an FID. So a lot of it is still on the table in terms of the final decision of companies whether they're going to pursue this. But there's a lot of companies looking very serious at hydrogen as a decarbonization solution, and a lot of folks are waiting on sort of the final rules for tax credits and such. But we have, a suite of end uses and technologies deployed already today in the United States. That's this final picture on the end of examples of deployment. So we have some hydrogen going for backup power, and we're seeing some more interest in this from data centers and other critical facilities, military bases, for instance. Forklifts is this interesting little niche application we found hydrogen to be really competitive in because it can compete against incumbent technologies, and it can compete against batteries due to refueling requirements, which it can be an interesting story for other sectors as well. We're seeing an increasing share of electrolyzers being deployed, up to 3.7 gigawatts, and this is 5 times above what we saw the previous year. So we're seeing a really explosive growth of electrolyzers being deployed. And this isn't announced projects. This is projects that are under construction and have reached a final investment decision. Then in California, there's some investment in the transportation sector. So they have some buses and retail stations and about 16,000 fuel cell cars running around on the road. We'll continue to see those operating, but we don't necessarily expect cars to become widespread across the United States. Now, we're sitting in a moment because we've had a tremendous opportunity opened up by the combination of the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. The secretary Secretary Granholm will call these the spine and the lungs of our decarbonization strategy, respectively. So the infrastructure law, the spine, is supplying $9.5 billion for clean hydrogen. That includes $1.5 billion for really targeting the manufacturing and innovations for the basic clean hydrogen technologies. That is something our office is funding and managing. So it's looking at innovations in manufacturing, recycling, and the electrolyzer technology itself. Then $8 billion is managed by another office that we're closely working with, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. They're providing $8 billion for at least 4 clean hydrogen hubs. And those in the know that the hydrogen hub application released $7 billion, and they reserved $1 billion to support end uses. And when I was in Georgia, the RFI was just closing. They had put out a request for information on ways to promote end use demands and figuring out how to spend that $1 billion of money. So I hope some folks on the call were able to respond to that RFI, and we hope to keep the ball rolling there. It's a really exciting program. And then the infrastructure law also required developing a national strategy and roadmap that we'll talk through next. And the Inflation Reduction Act, I'll say it has a lot of tax credits that can benefit clean hydrogen. There's tax credits that can benefit investments in fueling stations for hydrogen vehicles, for hydrogen vehicles, trucks, cars, fleet vehicles, for hydrogen storage. And a lot of that is all sort of being sorted out still. But what's getting the most attention, of course, is 45V, the Clean Hydrogen Production Tax Credit, which provides up to $3 per kilogram for clean hydrogen production based on the carbon intensity of the hydrogen that you produce. And there's been a lot of engagement from Constellation and others on this issue, of course, helping us think through how we can make sure that this hydrogen is truly as clean as companies claim it to be. So diving into this hydrogen strategy, the strategy breaks down into 3 components. The first is to target strategic and high impact uses of hydrogen. The second is to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen. And third is to focus on regional networks. So the first strategy is really focused on, we don't necessarily want hydrogen to be used for everything. There's a lot of areas and sectors where hydrogen would be outcompeted and wouldn't be economic to deploy when against electrification technologies or other types of energy storage, or just simply efficiency or process innovations. But there are some applications where hydrogen is sort of the solution, and there's no other opportunity to decarbonize economically without hydrogen on the table. So those are the ones we really want to target and strategically deploy hydrogen towards. The cost of hydrogen has been one of the most recognized barriers of hydrogen adoption. People will pay $15 per kilogram at the pump today at those retail stations in California. That cost is coming down, of course. But we're targeting $1 for 1 kilogram of hydrogen by 2031. That will really enable a lot of end uses to be deployed because you can then compete against natural gas on cost. And then finally, focusing on regional networks, the hydrogen hubs are a key part of the strategy there. And all these will be supported by enablers. We need to ensure that clean energy is supported by good jobs and workforce development, including good union jobs. We have a whole team focused on safety codes and standards, as that is a top priority for our office. And then continued policy and investment, and of course, a huge focus on energy and environmental justice as supporting these initiatives. So as I mentioned, we're targeting these strategic end uses. So what are they? We set a projection of clean hydrogen deployment out to 2050. So we set a goal of 10 million metric tons by 2030. And again, 10 million metric tons would, this is not inclusive of current hydrogen use today. So this would be on par with all existing hydrogen use today, would be new clean uses of hydrogen. By 2040, we'd be up to 20 million metric tons, and then 50 million metric tons by 2050. And reaching that by 2050 would enable up to 10% of emission reductions towards that net zero goal. And by 2030, we would see about 100,000 jobs created supporting these hydrogen technologies. So the end uses we would see a lot in industry, ammonia and refineries. They use hydrogen today, and switching to a clean version offers an opportunity to reduce their emissions, especially as you see in 2030. That's some of the key sectors we will see deploying clean hydrogen. Then, further down the line, heavy duty transport, trucks, long haul transit, things where, the sheer weight of a battery for a Class 8 truck really makes it a challenge, in addition to the refueling times that take away from the profit that a truck driver can earn. That really presents a good business case for clean hydrogen to play a role. And then also, something I love to point out, energy storage. From the modeling we've seen from a bunch of different academic institutions, the more renewables you have and the more electrification you have, the more you need hydrogen to balance the grid across seasons. As you have, diurnal shifts, you also have seasonal shifts. Like you have sunnier seasons naturally, but you also have windier seasons across the country. So balancing that across the United States will require seasonal energy storage, and hydrogen is the best option for seasonal energy storage. So the more renewables and electrification we have, the more case we have for hydrogen as an enabler of all those technologies. As I mentioned, we announced the hydrogen shot back in 2021. That is producing 1 kilogram of hydrogen for $1 in 1 decade. And a lot of the funding that we announced, we announced $750 million in funding opportunity for hydrogen technologies that will help get us there. And we're continuing to announce more funding. We just announced $46 million in additional projects yesterday that will continue to help getting us to this shot. So it's fundamental research, and also economies of scale will really help get us towards this goal. Then finally, focusing on regional networks, the hydrogen hubs is a key part of this. Part of the issue of why hydrogen did not necessarily see as much success, in the early aughts, was that they were tackling a demand sector, end use light duty vehicles, where you have a massive chicken and egg problem, where people don't necessarily want to buy cars without reliable fueling stations, and you can't get people to invest in fueling stations without a fleet of vehicles that are dependent on them. And the hydrogen hubs really tackle this by trying to deploy clean hydrogen production and end use in close proximity with connective infrastructure as a way to make sure we're making these nodes where you're not necessarily, you're getting the chicken and egg at the same time. And then we can be connecting these hubs across regions and expanding them out to other regional economies after they are developed. And we're hoping that these will be the anchors of the hydrogen economy for the United States moving forward. Something else I want to mention, we have the liftoff reports. You can find them all at liftoff.energy.gov. We released 4 earlier last year. One was on clean hydrogen, and some of those insights, such as the 12 million metric tons of hydrogen announced by 2030, that comes from that report. And just earlier this week, I think, it might have been last week, we released wave 2 of the liftoff report. So that included one on industrial decarbonization, which was a large crosscut across a lot of different decarbonization technologies for the industrial sector. One was a deep dive within that on chemicals and refining, and one on cement. So I definitely encourage you to take a look. I know I just assigned you 400 pages of reading or so, but they are deeply researched. They reflect some of the best thinking across DOE, and it was an effort that was provided deep engagement with the private sector, so that we can be operating from a common set of facts and understanding on these technologies to see how they can play a role. And because hydrogen is one of those one of the strategic end uses for hydrogen is the industrial sector. Looking at that chemicals refining report in particular shows that with the existing tax credits, you can potentially break even, or you can be make a profit on deploying it in the near term in the 2030s. By using those tax credits and applying them for the industrial sector. So I think that presents a real opportunity for clean hydrogen producers and end users to really get serious about some of these investments. Then finally, we have some upcoming dates. Hydrogen has its own national holiday. Congress designates it every year. October 8th is National Hydrogen Day. It's based on the atomic weight of hydrogen. So we'll be celebrating there, and you'll see a lot of press coming out of our office around then. So definitely keep an eye out for that. We also host an annual merit review every year. The next will be on May 6th through the 9th in 2024. And that gives you a full overview of every project we're working on in our office and offers an opportunity for the community to engage with our technology, make sure that our portfolio of investments is heading in the right direction to be influencing the field. And we have a lot of other tools for you to access if you're interested in getting a little bit more into the technical weeds. So that, I'd love to thank you for the time and looking forward to your questions.
That's great. So Thomas, I have a first question for you is from actually one of our students, and it kind of gets back as we look at industrial application of hydrogen and decarbonizing those tough to decarbonize sectors, the industrial. Why is hydrogen more advantageous than, for example, natural gas or other resources that might be available? What makes hydrogen so attractive?
Yeah, so hydrogen is currently used as an input for some of these processes, and the hydrogen that they use is derived from natural gas. And so some of the options are either continuing to use that natural gas and then capturing those process emissions. A lot of folks are pursuing 98% capture technologies, so that's can get you to pretty low carbon. And then some people are looking at using electrolysis, so that's zero emissions when combined with clean energy. And then just simply supplying the clean hydrogen to those end uses is a way to reduce the emissions or fully decarbonize some of these sectors. And there's no way to electrify a feedstock of hydrogen necessarily, right? So that's why we see that's playing a key role. Hydrogen can also serve as a reducing agent. That's one of the reasons it's used in the industrial sector today. That means it performs a certain chemical function, and so one of those people are looking at is in the steel sector. So when you're producing steel, you need to start with iron ore. And the iron ore has the iron atoms there, but attached to a bunch of oxygen. And today, that that iron ore is reduced using natural gas. So you take the natural gas and you combine it with the iron ore, and you produce CO2 and then that raw iron. However, you can reduce instead with hydrogen. So you combine the hydrogen with those oxygens and produce water, and then are left with the hydrogen, left with that raw iron. So that's a way of potentially decarbonizing the steel sector that we've invested some technology, some of our dollars into, and are continuing to explore further. So that's another one of those sectors where hydrogen plays a role that is difficult to be replaced by another technology.
Very helpful. We've had conversations with our chemical manufacturers here in Texas and Louisiana, who have said they have a need to decarbonize, number one, in their energy use, but they also see natural gas as a very essential feedstock for work that they do. They need that as a commodity. And we've even had one chemical company suggest that natural gas is just too valuable to burn as fuel, and that hydrogen is a much more attractive opportunity. Question for you on the green hydrogen side. I've seen some forecasts that we believe, and it looks like your presentation is supports this conclusion. But right now we manufacture blue hydrogen using natural gas and extracting the hydrogen from that. But we've seen some projection that by 2030, we may be able to manufacture green hydrogen competitively compared to natural gas. Is that a safe assumption, or do you think we're on track to make those to meet those goals?
Yeah, the hydrogen target is based around getting to cost parity with fossil pathways for producing hydrogen. So the cost of hydrogen production is around $1 per kilogram today for making just basic dirty hydrogen with the fossil using natural gas and no carbon capture. So if you can get down to that, that's the point at which you can just do a quick feedstock replace and decarbonize a process and also use hydrogen for new end uses because you're about on cost parity with just using natural gas as an energy source instead. So if you're using that hydrogen for high energy heating or even power generation, something the EPA is of course exploring with their updated regulations on power plants, that's when you start reaching cost parity for that. So that's part of what informed that target. We don't necessarily make projections or guesses as to when things will necessarily meet that, but we have a lot of scenarios and modeling to support that we can meet this target if we're investing in our supply chains and we are reaching economies of scale for electrolyzer production, continuing to reduce the cost of clean energy, which we are continuing to do. The wind and solar office is continuing to innovate in that basic energy, so bringing down the cost of the energy inputs as well. And then, of course, continued innovation that we're investing in on not just the electrolyzer, but also everything that goes around it, what's called the balance of plant, because you have compressors and you have, you need a deionizer to make sure the water is the right quality to be fed into the electrolyzer. So all those components into it can also be innovated and reduce the cost of the overall system. So all those things together can get us down to $1 per kilogram. Now, of course, the cost to the actual consumer depends on a lot of things, but the Inflation Reduction Act providing a very significant incentive. We're seeing modeling from other groups outside of DOE, so not necessarily our opinion, but what we're seeing from others is that you can get down to very, very low costs in some parts of the country that has good wind, good solar, and where you can combine those assets and run your electrolyzer at a high capacity factor. And then with the tax credit, you can get down to very, very low prices by the 2030s. And I think that's part of what has people so excited is that we're looking at the same modeling and seeing that there's a ton of opportunity for very low cost hydrogen when you're coupling with the tax credits.
Great. We have the country's largest, one of our member companies at APA is in the process of building what will be at this point the country's largest green hydrogen project here in North Texas. And we had a visitor, a legislator from Corpus Christi yesterday, who I know is surrounded by interest in the manufacture of hydrogen for export out of Corpus Christi. So it's an exciting opportunity. I know the blending, there's an opportunity to use existing gas plants, and there's an exploration now to look at blending hydrogen into methane or natural gas for use in those plants. Do you have any insight on the promise that might hold?
Yeah. So blending.
And why would we do that?
Yeah. Blending is one of the things where people are looking at it candidly because it's kind of an easy offtake, right? If you can just throw it into a pipeline, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about new hydrogen buses and waiting for all those to get developed. So sometimes people are looking at blending purely out of convenience, but there is an opportunity for where you will continue to need natural gas and you can't necessarily decarbonize by electrifying some end uses. Some people are interested in blending where it can reduce, your carbon emissions for some of those end uses. We have a program called HyBlend. It's a consortium with about 30 companies convened by the National Renewable Energy Lab. And they've been looking at blending for natural gas pipelines and looking at the compatibility of materials. I mean, they're really into the technical details, but looking at how you can make sure you do blending safely and where that can be deployed in the United States. Now, the EPA, as I mentioned, is looking at blending as well for power sector, so combustion for combustion turbines. They see it as one of the potential ways of having a best emission reductions technology for power plants, and so that's one of the things that they're looking at as well, in addition to carbon capture. So yeah, folks are interested in blending for a lot of different reasons. There are a lot of concerns from the environmental community on blending. Just in terms of potential increase in NOx emissions, because hydrogen, when it's burned, does produce NOx. When you use it in a fuel cell, like in a vehicle or a bus, that is not an issue. You only produce water. But when it is combusted, just due to the heat of the combustion, you are producing NOx. So there's some concern on that. And there's a lot of research going on right now from DOE looking at low NOx burners, especially for the industrial sector. One of the things that we mentioned in our strategy and roadmap was that hydrogen could play a role in high heat processes. The higher temperature you get in general, it is harder to electrify those end uses. So hydrogen combustion is likely to play a role in some industrial processes where you just need a high amount of heat, and you need a combustible gas in order to get there. So looking at low NOx burners is one of those technical areas that we're really excited about, to make sure that we are decarbonizing these end uses, and we can use up to 100% hydrogen, so fully decarbonizing some of these end uses, but making sure we're doing it safely and not increasing particulates or increasing pollutants like NOx.
Okay. Question around the materials science of hydrogen, and I know there are a lot of questions now about the interaction of hydrogen with existing natural gas pipelines, and interaction of hydrogen with the components within a gas turbine. Can you give any insight on, for folks who may not be familiar with the issues around the materials and the interaction of hydrogen with metals? One of the challenges that we're facing, because I think we're all wondering, one of the things that I'm most intrigued about is the idea of using excess renewable energy and then being able to pipe that energy, from remote locations where our political opposition is preventing us getting any transmission. It sure would be nice to put those renewables in a pipe and send them to a customer. But what's the impediment there in the materials space?
Yeah, and again, it does exactly depend on the material. So hydrogen, because it is so small, will interact with the crystal material, the crystalline composition of the metal, and will cause it to deteriorate, which causes embrittlement, is a process that happens, which can cause fracturing and leakage in some of these systems. Now, we safely transport hydrogen in over 1,600 miles of pipeline in the United States today. So, you can get the right material and you can operate these pipelines safely. But a lot of existing pipelines aren't necessarily compatible, or we don't even know the material composition of the pipeline to assess the compatibility for using it as to transport hydrogen instead. So that's part of what happens, and there's a lot of research going on as such in the High Blend initiative, as I mentioned earlier, to look at what sort of retrofits could happen for a pipeline in order to make it compatible for hydrogen delivery.
That's great. I just have a couple more questions, and so I'll just remind the folks who are listening, if you have questions before our time is up, to throw them in here. So when we were, I was able to watch recently the president's address at Cummins up in Minnesota, I believe. And it was interesting. Cummins, when I was a kid, everybody wanted a Cummins turbo diesel truck. None of us had one because they were too expensive, but we all wanted one. And that's a company that has a history. I learned in his presentation that half of the engines that went into the war effort were manufactured by Cummins. So it's a company with a long history in producing engines and drivetrains and other things. but they're moving 600 workers from those traditional manufacturing jobs into manufacturing for the hydrogen space, electrolyzers and other things, and then adding to that 600 an additional 100 workers. It's intriguing to me. I'm curious to know what you are seeing in traditional industries, companies that we may be familiar with that are moving into this space. What are the opportunities for traditional American manufacturers to get in? Are you seeing a lot of immediate action of companies stepping forward?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing action of companies stepping forward, and I think everybody recognizes this moment after the Inflation Reduction Act as transformative for clean hydrogen and other clean energy technologies. So as of course you have the 45V clean hydrogen production tax credit, but you also have 48C, the manufacturing tax credit that provides up to 30% of investment tax credit in facilities that manufacture things like fuel cell vehicles and electrolyzers. And so there's a real opportunity to bring that investment to the United States and make sure that the manufacturing capacity is being built up here. And we're seeing not just U.S. companies really champing at the bit here, but also foreign companies investing in the United States. Again, you see either if they left or they're coming here for the first time, there's an enormous amount of interest. We sort of have an internal inventory that we're working on tracking these announcements for some of these wins. We're seeing a lot of money come to the United States because people all over the world are excited about the opportunities here.
Right. Yeah, it is. Our opposition politically loves to say that our wind turbines and our solar facility, everything's made in China, when very little of it is at all, and especially in the wind space, almost none of it is. But that's the knee-jerk reaction against renewable energy. So it's very exciting not only to see battery manufacturers coming to the States, solar panel manufacturers coming to the States, but to see this incredible uptick in interest in hydrogen production and in, of course, the fuel cell technologies as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And we, like with solar before, the United States has been the leader in innovation in these areas for many decades. But we haven't always had the policy supporting the local manufacturing here in the United States. And we could see ourselves easily, in a similar position as we have with solar panels, where a lot of the manufacturing still happens here, but the supply chain is not in our hands, where 90% of the supply chain for the materials and components is foreign. And a large part of it owned by China as well. So we have a real opportunity where we've assessed the supply chains for electrolyzers and fuel cells really back at the beginning of 2022. The White House released 4 reports on critical materials and metals for a bunch of different clean energy technologies, electrolyzers and fuel cells being one of them. And so we have our arms around the problem, and we're investing in the research areas to make sure that we don't succumb to the same problems. Because I agree. You hear the talking point a lot, and there isn't necessarily there's a lot to push back on there, but we do have to recognize that we do need a robust supply chain for these technologies to be in the arms of the United States.
Yeah, I'm tired of. I think everyone's tired of the U.S. inventing the most amazing technologies and then sending them to other countries to capitalize on and benefit from. And we saw just in the last few weeks this new lithium discovery. And so it's great to see America moving in the right direction. And I just want to say I appreciate the work that you're doing. I want to thank you again for your presentation in Georgia and your presentation here today. I know there are folks who are watching now and will watch this later who are going to have questions about how to get in touch with you and how to learn more information about what DOE is doing and how they can be more involved. Do you have any recommendations for them on how they can stay engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. I always feel free to reach out to me, by way of Jeff or others. We're consistently looking for reviewers for our funding applications, for our annual merit review, because we recognize that input from industry and the public is a way that we really make sure that our investments are benefiting the American people. So that's number one. And really number two is, just continue to, follow along as we're making the announcements on the hydrogen hubs and everything else, making sure that folks in your communities know, who would be eligible for some of these grant opportunities, because we want to make sure, we're reaching the broadest group possible. And also, we're undertaking a lot of work to make sure that we're reaching out to minority serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, Native tribal nations, and tribal colleges. And so, certainly, if you have relationships there, please pass along information to them and provide us with connections, because we want to make sure that, again, we're benefiting all Americans and ensuring that the equitable energy transition is truly that.
Great. Thomas, thank you so much. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished already with the hydrogen plan and execution. And thank you again for your time today. And I'll hand it back to Casey.
Thanks.
Let me just echo what Jeff said. What a fantastic presentation. I will be honest that I didn't know a lot about hydrogen before we started digging into it, in this working group, and I'm excited about the opportunities that it presents for not just the companies that are members of APA, but for the whole country of the United States. I mean, this is going to free up it's just going to create a lot of innovation that I don't think people are seeing the line of sight to yet, but I think it's very, very exciting. Just let me thank everybody again for joining today. We had a really good group here. I think we got all the way up to like 54 people at one point. So very exciting. They're becoming more. This is the most popular one yet, Thomas. So I just know that you've set the bar very high, and we hope to keep replicating it over the next months to years. But again, I'll just give just a quick reminder to folks: if you've got a topic you want to hear about, please shoot me or Jeff or Sarah or Judd or any of the APA folks a note, and we will work to try to get somebody in on that topic. But I'll be watching for our next webinar, hopefully coming in the next few months. And Thomas, you're always welcome to join us as a guest if you'd like to sit in on those as well.
Sounds great.
Thanks again, everyone.